Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of CP4SA, your one-stop for all things career. Today we're taking a bit of a different direction where we're going to be focusing on the mining industry, but not the mining industry as you'd expect. We're going to be focusing on illegal mining. And the guest I've got is Vuma Ngcobo, somebody that's been sitting beside me on this platform before, and I think as a result I won't really need to get into too much of an introduction. If you want to know more about him, the most important part, Vuma, is maybe somebody's watching this and thinking, what positions us to be able to speak about what illegal mining is or why it's illegal or any of that stuff. So do you maybe just want to give a bit of background for you, why you think you're suited to have this conversation?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me. I think it's really great to be part of CP4SA. Really a great platform for young people to engage on a number of issues that are relevant in terms of career. But also, as you get into your career, you'll also find yourself interacting with a lot of relevant challenges or relevant issues that either have to do with the historical nature of mining or have to do with issues that you might face. Maybe you might work at the DMR and be a regulator in future. Who knows, maybe this can help you out in gathering some information and building a background on the issue. Illegal mining in South Africa ranges from a number of issues. In fact, it goes as far as looking at things like the illegal diamond mining on some of the beaches in the Northern Cape. You've got illegal diamond mining and not diamond mining, but illegal mining and trading in Limpopo. If you go up to Skokune Valley, you see a lot of that taking place with regards to the chrome. There was a beautiful episode on Carte Blanche around what the police and SAPS and the Hawks, as well as the military, were participating in exercises trying to address those issues around illegal mining. And most importantly, I think the one that's been hyped up and most importantly, I think it was during the time where unfortunately quite a large number of women got raped at an old mine dump. And really I hope they get the healing that they really need to get. But in the gold mining industry, which is a legacy industry for South Africa. And yeah, I think if you see my facial expression, it's, I don't think any woman should go through that, so yeah. But anyway, that's the thing about illegal mining in general, so yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose, so the angle that I'll be taking for it would also be, so I did some postgraduate work on prospecting law, which basically just speaks to what do you need to have in place before you can go in and get something out of the ground, which I think will be fundamental for the discussion that we're going to have today. So I think important to mention is this is not going to be just a back and forth today where I just throw questions at you. I'll be looking at some of the stuff that I've been seeing on social media and just throwing it your way to see what your thoughts on it are. And I think that'll make for interesting conversation, but also it will be, in touch with actual conversations that have been happening out there in South Africa. So I want to start with the most controversial of the tweets that I've seen. And what I will do is I will put up the tweets. I'll blur out the names, blur out the profiles, because I haven't gotten permission to share them. But I've heard this from multiple people. And the sentiment goes, it's called illegal mining when black people are doing it. And it's called just mining when white people are doing it.
Yeah, I've got a response to that. And it goes simply to say that is not the case. The fact is that there are a number of miners involved, juniors, emerging, across various numbers of commodities, be it gold, be it coal, be it iron ore, be it whatever it is in the commodities that are available, that are black-owned, fully black-owned. There's one company that I know of, which I won't mention now, but it's one of the best performing black-owned mining companies in South Africa. And they're really doing some brilliant work in the space that they're in. So to say that because it's if it's black people it's called legal mining, if it's white people it's called mining. It's not the case.
Yeah.
I think it is rather a question of whether you are compliant within the regulatory framework. I think that word compliance is going to come back a lot of times because I think that is the base of what you need to do. Because I think if you understand the mining industry, you understand it's more than just extracting a mineral and going out there. There's so many things. There's environmental, social, governance, rehabilitation that you need to be thinking about. You need to think about structural damage that you can cause to a particular area once you're done with your operations. I mean, one of the things I can think about in an article at the time when Herman Mashaba was still the mayor of the city of Johannesburg, explaining that the city around Nasrec was at risk of having everything within a 5-kilometer radius being obliterated simply because the illegal miners were blasting close to 30 centimeters of the gas pipelines that are underground.
Oh.
Egoli gas. You know Egoli gas? When
Yeah.
you go around, so they've got a network of gas pipelines. And some of those illegal miners are blasting so close to those pipelines that it puts the whole city at risk. So I think it's something that's so important to talk about, and there's a lot of information that isn't necessarily hyped up or amplified, or that has been published and forgotten about, that perhaps we need to engage on.
Yeah, true. I mean, I will say, so I stay in the East Rand, I stay in Boksburg, and for people that don't know, Boksburg has quite a few underground, I would say old mines, if I can put it that way. So we get, periodic tremors every now and then. Yeah. And every now and then you'll hear an explosion there and thereabout. And I did actually look into it to try and see like what mining is currently happening there, because to my knowledge, most of the mining had stopped. But you do get a lot of illegal mining that's still happening in that area. And like you say, you get these explosions taking place every now and then. But you never know when these tremors become a little more than just a tremor, right? And you basically engage a bigger fault at work, and things fall apart. So the governance, I think, like you said, the governance to understand what are the risks of what you're doing, what are the impacts of what you're doing. I think that doesn't come into play when you start speaking, zamazama or illegal mining. But I think just on the word zamazama. If you think about it, so it means to, I don't know in your language, but when we speak about to zama, it's to try, right? It's to hustle. And it's essentially using what you've got to get something out, using the little that you've got to get something out.
Yeah.
And I think this is where then the discussion...
Try again.
Try again. And I think this is where the topic of illegal mining becomes a particularly difficult one, because I also understand that a lot of the time when mining companies have come and they've mined and they've left, they leave for different reasons. Like they leave maybe because the size of the machinery they use, it's no longer feasible for them to continue. Therefore, it would take more money to get it out than it is worth to sell it. But that doesn't change the fact that a normal person that can scrape that material out, whether it be coal or whatever the case is, they would easily be able to get it, dislodged and get it to sale for a relatively good price that makes it worthwhile. So I think for locals, when they see that opportunity and also look at the climate of there are no jobs, I'm going to go out and find a solution for myself. It becomes very difficult to tell people like that, this is illegal, here are all the things that you've got to comply with. But I've also seen, and I think this is where I'm going to bring you into the conversation, I've also seen that, we're not the only country that's had this problem, and there are people that have taken measures to try and remedy that. Do you perhaps want to touch on any of that?
Yeah, look, I think number one is just appreciating the context of the country that we live in. And you look back on the history of the country and the mining industry in general. It's one that still has a lot of intergenerational trauma, woundedness that is still dealing with. And you have seen the mining industry, I must mention, making a concerted effort to try and address some of the historical legacies. Take, for example, in the silicosis point of view, we have a number of companies who were brought to sue via a class action suit, and they really did make the efforts to pay out to those people who are affected by silicosis or their families if they've since passed.
Yeah.
So the mining industry is trying to make an effort, and kudos to them to recognizing their role in our history of our country and making amends for that, which is the first point. Number two, we live in a country with a lot of poverty, highest level of inequality in the world. And you know, you have someone who says that, listen, I'll give you 100 rand to grind this rock with a hammer so that I can extract the gold. And there's people who know that I'm going to go pay 100 today. I'd rather take the hammer and grind the rock. You understand? So you have that context in people who are just trying to simply put food on the table, be it for them, grandmothers, family, whatever it is. So I think that's the one context. However, at the same time, it's also important to understand that the reason why illegal mining is illegal is because there is a regulatory framework that governs a lot of mines. We've seen what happened in Jagersfontein, where people were affected simply because the dam wall collapsed, the freeboard between the dam wall and the dam water levels was too high, and that collapsed and impacted a lot of people significantly. So that's one of the issues. That's why you've got to regulate a mine, because mining produces waste, and how you manage that waste needs to be regulated. In the same sense, again, also you've also got a lot of impacts. I mean, one of the things I always speak about is that Zamazamas, for example, will use old school techniques to extract gold, which is crushing a rock simply and then sort of like panning to extract the gold. Or if you're not panning, you're going to use mercury to sort of extract the gold. How do you dispose of that mercury? I think one of the industries in South Africa that's housed to the highest standards is mining. And the reason why is because the government understands that the outputs or the waste produced through the whole production process has a greater environmental impact. Therefore, regulation must be put in place to ensure that when it is done properly and appropriately.
Yeah.
Right? And that's where the problem comes in. I think with a lot of Zamazamas, small enterprise, you're trying out, you can cut corners, even more when you are doing something illegally. You've got even more reason to cut corners. And that's where the problem lies. How other countries deal with this issue, I think, is being proactive.
Yeah.
You've got to be proactive with dealing with this issue. It's not something that you go and you deal with because you've got to be proactive. So thinking of countries like Mongolia, Suriname, how they've dealt with those issues. Suriname, for example, has set up, and Mongolia, a state-owned trading company that says, okay, as opposed to you having to sell this illegally and smuggle it illegally, we as the state are going to set up a state-owned gold buying company. We will buy your gold for you at a fair, reasonable market price based on the quality of the outputs that you produce, and then we will then consolidate whatever we get from these small miners and sell it off.
Yeah.
And that's what you find in a lot of countries. South Africa has done it.
Yeah.
In the mining industry, be it the private sector, has done it before. Even the state has done it before through the diamond trading company, the DTC, state-owned. They're doing it. It's there. The infrastructure is there. Depends on the commodity that you're trading, but something needs to be done. Structure, governance, and a unitary body needs to be put in place to try and address that issue.
Yeah. Look, so I think obviously when you bring in structure, when you bring in governance, what also then needs to be focused on would be safety.
Yes.
And I think if you watch, the Carte Blanche episode, or you watch any of the brave journalists go and interview, I feel bad saying illegal miners, but the people that are partaking in that process, you do see how the PPE standards are not quite what you get in a mine. And I do imagine that if you were proactively offering the means to purchase, you would start to regulate what exactly you need to be wearing for you to be going into those, very small spaces, very unhealthy spaces. And you're right. I think there's also good examples of individuals that collect alluvial diamonds and hand them over to a bigger company that buys them officially, so that they can be registered. So the point is, it has been resolved before, and I don't expect you to have the answer as to why we seem to have regressed so much, and I think I say that with an asterisk to it, because it's seeming more and more like it's not that we've regressed, but it's that it's come back into the spotlight. And now that it's come back into the spotlight, there's so much illegal mining that's being exposed, and we're seeing a lot of it. But it's not that it wasn't there before.
Yeah.
And it took that one incident that you mentioned, with the unfortunate incident of the ladies being, sexually abused. And I think what it did is it made us think, but how much of this is happening? So there's two types, right? You've got the small time guys that are going in almost, if you think of subsistence mining, you mine just to be able to feed your family. But I've also seen operations where it's large scale, where if you look at it, it looks like a full-blown mine, but there's just no documentation. These guys are just, they've got these big trucks, they've got shovels, and they're just loading out material.
From what I know and I understand, I mean, the law applies at the end of the day. And part of the law says where you dig, you rehabilitate. And unfortunately, that's where the criminal element comes in. How do you bring in accountability to bridge the gap and say that, okay, you've done this in this particular area, environmentally. Now that you've extracted what you wanted, fix it.
Yeah. No, true.
So that's just some food for thought within that particular context.
Yeah. Look, it's very complex, I think, how mineralogy or ownership of minerals works, right? Because I've had this conversation with family before to say, you could find yourself walking along the Orange River, kicking some quartz or rocks or whatever, and if you happen to kick a diamond and you're the first person to touch it, and you pick it up and realize, oh my gosh, this is a huge diamond, it doesn't belong to you.
Yeah.
And I think to try and explain that to people, so it's the same as when you buy a piece of land, right? And maybe the geologists will understand this a lot better. When you buy a piece of land, what you're buying is actually the surface. Everything that's beneath, everything that's underground is not yours.
State, yeah.
So that's why when mines come and they explore, they can find platinum hundreds of meters below your house. It doesn't mean that that's for you.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the idea of ownership gets a bit confusing, because I think people think if they find something, if they are the ones to get it out, exploit it, therefore it belongs to them.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, there are laws to it, and I think you've touched on governance, you've touched on rehabilitation, but also importantly, there's the discussion around tax. To say, because these are state owned, when you get them out, what we can trust from the mines that we do have registered is that whatever they sell, a portion of that money goes back.
Taxes, royalties.
Yes.
And a big one, big one. I mean, you had 14-year-olds getting arrested in Krugersdorp when you had that issue of the sexual harassment take place in Krugersdorp, in Kagiso. It's that. It's simply, it is what it is.
It's exploitation. Yeah.
So from a ESG, environmental, social, and governance perspective, there's a lot of rules being broken, right? And the fact is, at the end of the day, nobody should ever be sexually assaulted. Every child has a right to go to school and get educated. Every single person who works in a dangerous operation deserves the rights to go back to their families to go and have dinner each and every single day.
Yeah, and I think you touched previously on, and I think maybe this is why it gets missed. You touched before around the silicosis case, and I remember that case very well because I actually did work on it post the case. Of course, I wasn't there when decision was made to say I think the mines had to pay like 5.6 billion, divided among a number of mines. But what's important there, and this is what I see with some of the videos that I've observed, an understanding of health effects versus physical injury effects. Because I think people think if they walk into the space and then walk out, everything's fine. But actually, things like silicosis take years to develop. Things like declining hearing because of all the blasting take years to develop. So it'll be in 10, 20 years' time when ill health hits you and you realize that, the quality of life that you're working so hard to try and bring cannot exist because, you've got all these health problems that now exist and you've got to spend all this money now to get your lungs back in order, if possible. So, I mean, in the Mpumalanga area, there will definitely be cases of black lung coming up pretty soon because you can just see that, there's a lot of impurities being breathed in. It's quite concerning. It's quite concerning.
Extremely concerning. Extremely concerning. I mean, you look at something, big thing is like sulfur, as you use sulfur to make your brown sugar white. Even in that process, those guys go up to the highest volcanoes, just to go and mine them. And it has a long-term health effects on them, only to earn $7 a day. Come on, I mean, yeah. So I think it's people that I want to use the word food chain, but it's the most vulnerable.
Yeah.
That get impacted. Yeah.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, before I move on to the controversial tweets, I see that Ghana is also highly having problems right now. So if you go on your social media and you search, like I was searching for some of the things to bring up, I see that Ghana is just as held back by illegal mining as we are. They also have the same thing where it's being directed or blamed on higher powers, i.e., politicians. Of course, we're not going to touch on that here because I don't want us to talk about things if we don't have all the information. So I would rather we just speak to the scientific or governance issues around. But it's also important to understand that that's the context of it. This week in South Africa, we had kingpins arrested. I think it's headline news. I'll also put that up on the screen. Yeah. Vehicles getting repossessed. But I quickly saw that people were saying, but those don't look like kingpins. It looks like it's maybe somewhere halfway up the food chain. But there has to be some people high up in power because this is way too organized. Both the extraction of this and the transportation of this across the border where that's also happening. And like I say, it's quite controversial just who's connected to it, what's happening around it. And I think the social fabric is very fragile at the moment because people think it's only becoming a problem now because the everyday person is also benefiting from this. But there are people in power who've always had their hands in the cookie jar.
Yeah, look, I think the issue needs to be addressed for what it is. It could be people in power, it could not be. It could be just a guy who just like if you watch Narcos people, you see like Pablo Escobar story. It was someone who literally grew up in poverty, but he just and had a brilliant mind, but used the mind for wrong.
Okay, so getting straight into the tweets. This one is twofold because two separate people had something to say. But the first one is small-scale miners should be legalized. Reason being that bigger companies cannot mine where there's more cost on the output. Hence the need to use smaller machines for small output that still helps in creating jobs. In Zim, they are now called artisanal miners, not zamazamas. And I mean, the second tweet to that is just agreeing, saying small-scale miners must be legalized. I only have a problem with the crime, so the alleged rape case from the Zamazama that must be condemned with utter contempt it deserves, or with the utter contempt that it deserves. Besides the rape issue, as a country, we should think of ways of bringing them in the mainstream economy.
Yes and no.
Go on.
What do they call it? Stop and pillar mining technique.
Yeah.
So there's one thing you gotta qualify, right? Legality, number one. Number two, safety. There are people who are mining. They're mining old mine dumps in Kimberley. They've got mining licenses from the DMR, set up as artisanal miners. There is a case study. It exists there. It's been done. The problem is illegality and crime. And unfortunately, it's a crime in the Bayenzan.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of crime that takes place within that space. Smuggling, commodities moving out without tax through the smuggling issue. You've got crime, robberies, murders. I mean, there was a couple whose car broke down on, I think it was Snake Road in Boxburg, and they just got shot in their car. Illegal guns, everything. So let us not call an illegal miner who is a criminal and compare them to someone who's just trying to make a living, who's an artisanal miner.
Yeah. Not the same thing.
It's not the same thing.
Yeah.
Number two, should the regulatory framework exist, these guys who are mining the pillar, which is meant to be support, they are mining the support, whatever's left over, depending on obviously how the geology is underground, etc., etc. But there are guys who will find, okay, there's some gold here, but you find that might have been sacrificed by the original miner because they want to keep that particular layer there as support.
To keep the roof up.
Keep the roof up. And you have guys who are mining that, you have guys mining 30 centimeters away from the gas pipeline.
Yeah.
Some of these places should not even be accessible because of the risk that exists. You find probably you'll have a whole area collapsing simply because somebody was just doing something they weren't supposed to be doing in that area.
Yeah.
So that's the issue at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yes, where there is merit, legalize and commercialize. Where there is merit. But where you're putting people's lives at risk, where there are criminal elements involved, no.
Yeah, and I mean there is mixed feelings about this, because the next tweet is illegal mining in South Africa is sponsored by its nationalities mentioned here, so I'm not going to mention them, not important. But it's basically sponsored by external elements from outside the country. The Zamazama name is misleading. They're not desperate people trying to hustle for making a living. They are raiding, raping, and pillaging our country. So that's the extreme opposite to the previous.
Yeah, and my response really just ties the two together.
Yeah.
If I'm being honest,
Yeah. You've got to find the. Yeah. Because I think.
Yeah, there's like certain boxes you've got to tick.
Yeah.
Tick those boxes. If there's someone who qualifies, like the guys who are mining the old mine dumps, in Kimberley, and these old mine dumps, okay, they're mining them. They've got the regulatory framework, they've got mining licenses from DMR, they've got. That's the benchmark.
Yeah.
Yeah, and diamond is easy to mine. It's a totally different thing when you're talking about gold, because you've got environmental considerations.
Yeah.
There's just so much to think about that it really isn't thought about in that context that it should be. It's not as easy as just saying, yeah, make them artisanal miners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, this next one is from Times Live. So that one I can mention because that's an official communication platform, and they were just speaking to how, what we discussed before. You had a few individuals higher up being nabbed over the last week, but also that this was a concerted effort from the Hawks to actually do this. And I don't know if you followed that, but it does look like there's been some ambition to put a stop to it, and as a result, they've moved on from just catching the guys that are coming out of the ground to actually looking at who's buying this raw materials from the guys. Because it's a lot like with crime in South Africa, right? If there's no market for what you're getting out the ground, gold is not useful in that raw form just for the everyday person. Somebody needs to take it and go melt it and build it into whatever that they want to build it. So I'm particularly happy that they are nabbing some of the buyers. I just don't know how high up that goes.
Yeah, look, I think at the end of the day, again, it goes back to the points that I raised. Yeah, there are guys, who are buying the product from these guys, but at the end of the day, what I'm saying is that the best way to start and then you work back, regulate the market. State-owned buying company or whatever it is, and then you start to work back. Because I mean, even if you give these guys a fair price, I mean, for an ounce of gold, you see what the price is, $1,900 or something. Ranges 1.7, 1.6 to $2,000, obviously because of the gold markets. And if you're thinking about, if you want to insulate yourself from a recession, for example, gold, normally during recession, gold ticks up, even though the gold standard is no longer a thing anymore, but it's still kind of is when you're looking at investing. So, at the same breath, you've got to really think about that. To say that, okay, the price peaks at this point. If you can link the price you pay these guys to market dynamics, as opposed to undercutting them, which they are illegal markets, unfortunately, the man at the bottom gets undercut. Get some framework in, at least pay them a fair price, and then that will allow you to work back as a regulator, but it will also allow them to have capital to work back as well with you.
Yeah.
So if you say that, okay, now you've got to have this type of PPE, okay, because I'm earning a better rate from so-and-so market buyer, I can afford the PPE now, so I'm going to go and buy the PPE. And then you work it back as they grow until you get to the core of the issue.
Yeah. And I suppose that's probably important to mention, right? Like it's not free to become legal. You've got to spend the money to get permissions to be able to go and extract. But also the prices of what you're selling go higher because now you're selling them on official platforms and not being exploited.
You go and work, you get a kilo of rocks, you smash those rocks, and then you get like 0.8 grams of gold, put it on the market. If there's a fair price, it's a fair price.
Yeah.
But I say that with a caveat. There's no room for criminals here in SA.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very hard point that we need to address, is that you can talk about it, Zama illegal, I could be sympathetic, trying to feed them. If you're committing crime, if you are raping, killing, there's no room for you there. And unfortunately, that's what contextualizes the industry. We've seen some of the videos on social media.
Yeah, so I've got footage as well that's probably playing now of the guys, with these huge ones of cash. Guns,
rifles, assault weapons.
It does bring into the question, like, why do you need, we don't take guns when you go to work unless what we're doing is not supposed to be done.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. Yeah.
Hey, so I think this particular tweet speaks to something that we also spoke about, basically saying that it's messed up that, there was a gang rape of the 8 women in Krugersdorp. But these guys have been operating for at least 7 years, yet they're only caught now. Or more, yeah. And I guess that's the thing again, is why was this the trigger when, the act of illegal mining being a crime should have been the trigger itself?
I'm not going to respond to that.
Yeah.
What I will say, let us not wait for a major catastrophe to take action. Let's be creative and proactive in our thinking about how we can grow the economy to be more inclusive, including the artisanal, illegal miners with non-criminal elements, but unfortunately we know that it's skewed towards more criminal.
Yeah.
But there's some food for thought to be applied. Really need to be creative about our thinking. And let's not wait for, as I mentioned earlier, 5-kilometer radius destruction for us to take action and say, no, we're putting a stop to this.
Yeah, and I think the last of these tweets are basically just speaking to the fact that, it is cheap labor that's being exploited. So not everyone in the illegal mining trade is a leader, right? You've got people that are simply there, as we spoke, to make money to be able to support their families, and they get exploited for, like we said, very little prices to get into these very dangerous positions. But yeah, I think, look, I could go on, and you're gonna get themes around things like, it's the ATM leader, just to show that politicians are also on that same wave, speaking about how porous borders are the reason why we have illegal mining. Because it is a go-to for South Africans, to place the blame completely out there. But there's always like a back and forth. crime doesn't just happen here without, some South African involvement. But I think the moment, you can isolate a few parties that are coming from external, then we want to put all the blame on those particular parties. And I think there's a better way to address it because, and again, that's probably a lot more complex of a conversation to have as well. But I think for the purposes of this and for the purposes of closing now, do you foresee better management of illegal mining? And if not, what needs to change, do you think, for us to get to that space?
It's been proven that it can be done. It can be done. What you need now is creative thinkers, fresh mindset, fresh pair of eyes, different type of thinking. The potential is there to make this thing different. The potential is there to make it inclusive for all. We've just got to think about it right.
Yeah.
The power lies in the mind. I'll say no more.
Yeah. So essentially, and this is true for most cases, a lot of our problems, whether it be Eskom, whether it be illegal mining, whether it be anything, it comes back to, I don't want to say leadership, but who's in the room, right? We need to have an inclusive room where you've got bright young minds, you've got experienced old minds, everyone working together to resolve the problem. Because I think, like you rightfully say, South Africa, we need to find something to come out of this rut, and it's going to be a collaborative effort between those that have been doing this for a long time and the new people coming in with the bright new ideas.
Have you listened to the song Freemasons by Rick Ross?
I have. And
there's a line there about it, because back in the day there was this hype about Freemason, whatever. And there's a line there. A lot of great thinkers and a lot of great inventors. You just need great thinkers to resolve the issue.
Yeah.
I mean, in my corporate career, I once went into a room with a guy and they were working with this man. And this guy wanted a solution to a problem. And then the solution came, version 1. But version 1 was not what you'd call a big, hairy, audacious goal. It was just very simple, confined in the limits of reality. And then the guy comes back and says, nah, we've got to think bigger. The minute you're able to start thinking without limitation, be it possible or impossible now. And why I stipulate now is because what is impossible now, in the pace that technology develops and how innovation works, guaranteed within 18 months to at least a period of 5 to 10 years, you will have probably had the technological capabilities and innovations take place to allow it to make it a reality. That's what strategy is about. It forces you to literally think beyond current limitations. Might not be possible, it's in the plan. It will become possible eventually if we do incremental step changes.
Yeah.
And it doesn't just apply to anything technical, because when you think innovation, people think you're talking about technology, about nuclear fission. How am I going to keep nuclear fission and create a sun on Earth for unlimited energy? No, even in simple, soft things like policy making, there's a certain level of innovation. You just need a lot of, right now in South Africa, great thinkers. That's it.
Vuma, as always, a pleasure.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Lovely to be here.
Yep. Peace.